The terminal at Westbridge International buzzed with life. Rolling luggage, fast-moving passengers, the murmurs of conversations mixing seamlessly with the crackle of distant announcements calling out departing flights. A sense of urgency rippled through the air, the kind that belonged to airports, a place where everyone seemed to be going somewhere, and fast. But then everything stopped. A sharp, unmistakable sound, a slap, cut through the noise at gate 47. In an instant, conversations halted. The polished floor echoed the clatter of a wooden cane as it slipped from the grasp of an elderly woman. She stumbled but steadied herself. Slowly, she lifted her eyes to the flight attendant standing before her, the same woman who had just struck her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Travelers waiting to board the plane turned to watch. Some gasped quietly. Others stared in disbelief. "Mrs. Eleanor Braithwaite," the flight attendant barked, standing stiff and unmoved, her name tag gleaming against her navy uniform. "I told you to step aside." The older woman said nothing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Instead, she bent slowly, retrieved her cane with steady hands, and met the flight attendant's eyes with unsettling calm. "You," Eleanor said in a voice as cold as the marble beneath her feet, "just made the worst mistake of your life." The Sky Vista Lounge was a sanctuary from the usual chaos of the terminal. Sunlight streamed through wide windows that overlooked the busy runways. Inside, the gentle clink of porcelain cups accompanied the low murmur of conversations. The setting was calm, the atmosphere almost too quiet, like the surface of a lake hiding what stirred beneath. Near the window sat Eleanor Braithwaite, her hands resting lightly on the curved handle of her cane. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue dress with a pearl brooch pinned delicately to her collar. Her silver hair was smoothed back in an elegant bun. She was the image of composure, a woman seemingly content to sit and wait as planes came and went. Nearby, a young man in a crisp suit glanced at her. His name was Nathan Reynolds, a rising executive at a tech company in Chicago. After a moment's hesitation, he stood and offered his seat. "Please," he said politely, gesturing toward the leather armchair. Eleanor smiled faintly, but shook her head. "Thank you, young man. I'm perfectly fine where I am." Nathan nodded respectfully and returned to his seat. Most of the other travelers in the lounge paid her no mind. Just another older woman, traveling alone. No one guessed who she was, not even close. At the priority check-in counter, a team of flight attendants worked briskly. Among them was Heather Monroe, a tall woman with sleek black hair pinned tightly back. Her tailored uniform was immaculate, and she carried herself with the poise and efficiency of someone who had spent years in first class, serving VIPs and celebrities. She had become an expert in reading passengers at a glance, who belonged, who didn't. Her gaze swept past Eleanor without registering her. She focused on the suited executives, the luxury travelers, the ones who demanded perfection. When the first-class boarding call sounded, Eleanor rose. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if time was no longer a concern. Other passengers hustled past, jostling for position, but she moved with unhurried certainty. At the gate, she handed her ticket to Heather Monroe, who barely glanced at it. With a stiff, dismissive smile, Heather blocked her path with one hand. "Ma'am, this is the first-class line," she said in a clipped tone. Eleanor's gray eyes met hers, unwavering. "Yes, I know." Heather sighed. She glanced at the boarding pass more closely, expecting to confirm her assumption, but her brow creased as she read the seat assignment. "First class, seat 1A. She looked up again. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" she asked, tilting her head as though speaking to someone who might be confused. "I'm quite sure," Eleanor replied evenly. Heather's eyes flickered behind Eleanor, expecting a family member or caretaker to step forward and clarify the mistake. No one came. She was alone. "There might have been an error," Heather said carefully, keeping her tone controlled. "First class is reserved for certain passengers." She gestured toward the economy line. "You'll need to board over there." Eleanor didn't move. "There is no mistake," she said after a moment. This is my seat. Heather's jaw tightened. She had seen this before, passengers trying to bluff their way into first class. She had no time for it. She held the ticket up to the overhead lights, checking for signs of forgery. "I don't know how you got this," she muttered, "but you can't sit here." Behind them, the line grew longer. Passengers fidgeted, uncomfortable, watching the exchange. Nathan Reynolds, from the lounge earlier, shifted as if he might speak, but he didn't. Heather's voice sharpened. "Step aside." Eleanor stood still. And then Heather snapped. A sharp slap echoed through the gate area. The older woman's cane slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. A hush swept over the terminal. Several passengers gasped. A woman nearby, Clara Jennings, covered her mouth in horror. Nathan stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. Heather showed no remorse. "I told you to move," she said coldly. Eleanor stooped to retrieve her cane, her movements graceful. When she straightened, her eyes locked on Heather's, and for the first time, Heather took a step back. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Eleanor said, her voice as calm as ever. Heather scoffed, but unease prickled beneath her skin. "If you don't move, I'll have security escort you out," she snapped. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Nathan shifted again, clearly torn. Eleanor didn't flinch. She lifted her cane, holding it with quiet authority. "I'm sitting in first class," she said, "and I am boarding this flight." Heather took a breath through her teeth. "Unbelievable," she muttered. She turned to a younger flight attendant standing nearby. "Casey, call security." Casey hesitated. Something about this was wrong. The older woman wasn't panicked or confused. She was too composed. Before Casey could move, a deep voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary." All heads turned. A man in a tailored suit, badge gleaming on his chest, strode forward. Victor Chandler, the airline's regional director. He moved with quiet authority, and when he reached them, he didn't look at Heather first. "Mrs. Braithwaite," he said to Eleanor with respectful calm. "My apologies for the delay. Your seat is waiting." Heather blinked. "Wait, what?" Victor finally turned his eyes on her. "Step aside, Ms. Monroe." Heather's throat went dry. "There's a mistake," she said, trying to laugh. "There is no mistake," Victor said firmly. The crowd around them was hushed, waiting. Casey's mouth parted in shock, while Clara Jennings whispered to Nathan, "What's happening?" Victor's voice was ice. "Escort Mrs. Braithwaite to her seat." Casey stepped forward immediately. "Right this way, ma'am." Eleanor gave Heather one last look, one that said everything, and followed Casey through the gate. The crowd parted for her without a word. Heather stood frozen. Victor took a step closer, his tone low and dangerous. "When this flight lands," he said, "we will have a very serious conversation." Heather felt the blood drain from her face. The rest of the flight was unbearable. Heather was called to the cockpit, where Captain Jason Mercer sat with quiet disapproval. Beside him was Alexander Langley, a senior executive. It was Langley who delivered the blow. "Do you know who Mrs. Braithwaite is?" he asked. Heather's mind scrambled. "No," she admitted. Langley's gaze sharpened. "She's the chairwoman of this airline." Heather's world tilted. She had humiliated the most powerful woman in the company. In front of passengers. In front of staff. Langley's tone was cutting. "If she had been anyone else, would you have treated her differently?" Heather had no defense. She had seen an elderly woman and decided she didn't belong. "You will apologize publicly," Langley ordered, "and you will personally escort Mrs. Braithwaite for the rest of this flight." The humiliation was overwhelming, but she complied. She apologized to Eleanor, who listened silently before instructing her to repeat it to the entire first-class cabin. Heather's voice shook as she spoke. "I treated Mrs. Braithwaite unfairly. I was wrong. I disrespected her." Eleanor let the words hang in the air before nodding. But she wasn't finished. "Now tell them why," Eleanor said quietly. Heather felt exposed. "Because I assumed she didn't belong," she confessed. Eleanor studied her, then turned back to her book. For the rest of the flight, Heather was a ghost. Passengers watched her. Nathan's gaze was piercing, but not unkind. At one point, he spoke. "You thought you could decide who belonged," he said. "That's not respect. That's bias." The words stung because they were true. Heather served Eleanor silently. When she brought water, her hands trembled. Eleanor finally asked, "Has anyone ever made you feel like you didn't belong?" Heather had no answer. She had always believed she belonged. And now, for the first time, she understood how she had made others feel. When they landed, Victor Chandler was waiting. "Walk with me," Eleanor instructed. Heather obeyed. They approached a group of executives, including Langley and security. Heather's fate was clear, but Eleanor intervened. "She will take responsibility," Eleanor said firmly. "Won't you?" Heather's throat was dry, but she nodded. "Yes." Inside the conference room, James Carlisle, the operations manager, questioned her. Heather admitted everything: the assumptions, the bias, the failure to follow protocol. James's verdict was swift: probation, mandatory retraining, and close evaluation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a chance. Outside, Eleanor waited. When Heather emerged, they stood silently. "Why did you give me a chance to speak?" Heather asked finally. Eleanor's answer was simple: "Because I wanted to see if you would face the truth." Heather was quiet. "You could have had me fired immediately." "I don't believe in letting people walk away without learning," Eleanor replied. And Heather understood. This wasn't mercy. It was accountability. As the executives departed, Heather stood alone in the terminal, watching planes taxi across the tarmac. For the first time in her career, she wasn't in control. She was the lesson. And this time, she had no choice but to learn. If you found this story powerful, like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true-to-life lessons and reflections. Thanks for watching.